I really wrote it because I think the number one, maybe not the number one, but certainly a huge obstacle in many people's paths to getting their arms around their own finances is being overwhelmed with feelings of fear and shame and, knowing somewhere that somebody's wagging a finger at them, telling them they're being bad somewhere. And I think finances in general, right? Because money is just so important, right? The stakes are super high. For I don't know what reasons we don't teach this in school. Families are uncomfortable talking about money at home. And then it's just really easy to just go, oh, I don't want to think about it. And so I wrote this book hopefully to help people understand that if they are feeling those sort of negative emotions around their own situation, they're by no means alone. And that it's totally possible to start unpicking some of the obstacles that you may feel yourself and really get on a road to a better future.
Morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters, the show where we turn the daunting into doable, transforming your financial journey into an adventure of a lifetime. I'm your host, Chris Hensley, and today we're diving deep into a world where numbers meet narratives and sense makes sense. In this episode, we're thrilled to welcome Ann Lester, a trailblazer in retirement solutions and the author of the groundbreaking book, Your Best Financial Life. Ann's journey from financial hurdles to becoming a maestro of money management is nothing short of inspiring. We're exploring everything from the unique financial landscapes of millennials and Gen Z to the magic of compound returns. We'll debunk common savings myths and offer practical tips for balanced saving for retirement with immediate financial obligations. Ann, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Tried a new intro this time. Ooh, that's a lot to say at once.
Great. I was like, damn, maestro. I like that.
I switched it up just a little bit, but we're going to give that a try here. So I'd like to dive right into it here. The book, and you've got a picture of it in the background there. It's called Your Best Financial Life. Tell us and tell the listener, why did you write this book?
So I kind of wrote it for myself. Like it's the book I wished I'd had when I was 20 something years old. I've got two sons who are 24 and 26 right now. And, they both told me they learned stuff from it, which I thought was a home run because they've listened to me talk about this stuff their whole lives. Right. So that was great. I really wrote it because I think the number one, maybe not the number one, but certainly a huge obstacle in many people's paths to getting their arms around their own finances is being overwhelmed with feelings of fear and shame and, knowing somewhere that somebody's wagging a finger at them, telling them they're being bad somewhere. And that certainly was a huge part of my narrative. And that really seems to resonate when I talk to people. And I think finances in general, right? Because money is just so important, right? The stakes are super high. For I don't know what reasons we don't teach this in school. Families are uncomfortable talking about money at home. It tends to be a topic that most people don't like to think about. And so there are a whole bunch of reasons why people probably aren't armed with the sort of information and skill that they need to navigate this well by themselves. And then it's just really easy to just go, oh, I don't want to think about it. And so I wrote this book hopefully to help people understand that if they are feeling those sort of negative emotions around their own situation, they're by no means alone. And that it's totally possible to start unpicking some of the obstacles that you may feel yourself and really get on a road to a better future.
I love it. I love it. And I know in getting prepared for the show, I looked at your YouTube channel, and you've got a really nice YouTube channel there. And that was something that was really apparent. You started with the idea of people being overwhelmed with fear and shame. And really your YouTube channel is kind of welcoming. It lets people in, and it's kind of, that's how I felt when I looked at it there. In the book itself, you share some of your personal experiences, and they really shape the book. Can you tell us how your personal experiences played into writing the book?
Well, if you read the book, I start with just this horror story of me in just floods of tears finishing up something that sounds amazingly prestigious, which is a Fulbright scholarship in Tokyo, and literally not being able to pay to get my bags on the airplane to go to Milan, where I was going to start this new life, and ended up marrying this boy I met in grad school. And I didn't have maxed out my credit card and I didn't have the money to pay for the bags, and the gate agent just finally said, yeah, just whatever, go. Like, I don't need this lady crying in my baggage check area. And I was 26, and in my defense, in hindsight, I really was, like living a very frugal and poverty-stricken life. But still, like I had no clue that I had to budget for stuff like that. Like, what? They were going to charge me money for my suitcases? Um, and in the US, you were allowed 2 free check bags, and in the rest of the world, you were only allowed 1 free check bag. I didn't know that, right? So I just had no idea. Um, and they're just story after story after story about my own sort of combination of naivete, and my parents never taught me any budgeting growing up. They were very frugal, and they just figured we'd like, well, of course you're frugal. That's just the way people are. And so I didn't get taught these lessons at home. I certainly wasn't warned about the dangers of credit and how that worked because my parents didn't have credit cards. Like, you just didn't back then. So a lot of this, and then I was always interested in money kind of intellectually, maybe because I never had any. And so I ended up in this job where I was, managing other people's money, and certainly began learning some of the principles of investing and how to think about taking risk and make sure you're getting paid for the risk that you're taking. So I just loved all that. But it wasn't until I was asked to help build JP Morgan's target date funds, which was something I launched back in 2003, 2004, that I started learning about behavioral economics and the brain science behind why it's hard to save. And what I really want to do in this book is help people understand that it's okay, no matter where you feel you are, we can make it better for sure. And especially if you're 20s and 30s, you will be able to totally make it okay. You've got time to fix whatever's going on in your life financially. And I learned so much in building sort of the retirement solutions that I built that I just want to try to share some of that understanding so that people can understand the why behind why it's sometimes hard to save, because that was what broke it all open for me. It's like, oh, I'm not stupid. I'm not lazy. I'm not an idiot. I just spend money because that's what my brain does. Okay, well, let me figure out some rules for myself to stop me from doing that.
I love that. I think when it comes to financial literacy, one of the things you mentioned right away was that, your parents never taught you how to budget. We got out into the world with no clue. And this, I think, for the next generation or these millennials or Gen Z, that some of this stuff it's going to still be there for them, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us about, because I know in the book you go into the unique financial challenges faced by millennials and Gen Z. Could you elaborate on what sets these challenges apart from those faced by previous generations?
Yeah, I think economic growth is a little slower, right? So I think just wealth is growing less quickly. That's eventually going to have an impact on how quickly people's salaries grow and stuff. So that's just a little bit like, I think there's just it and that could all change tomorrow, right? There could be some, AI is the new thing, right? Huge revolution in growth, and like it could all be better. But for now, I think it's probable that we'd be growing a little slower than like the economy did when I was in my 20s. Um, Although it wasn't all roses then either. But I think a couple things have changed. One is the average price of a house and the average price of a car and the average price of an education have all gotten a lot higher compared to average wages. So a lot of other things cost a lot less money, and we always forget that, right? Clothes are a lot cheaper, electronics are a lot cheaper, computers, my goodness, like we have these things, right, that have way more computing power than the mainframe computer did at my college, probably when I was going to college as a freshman. So we lose sight of where we're gaining a lot, but certainly houses and cars are huge spending categories. We also lose sight of the fact that the average house and the average car is a lot nicer than what I might have had, right? But even so, just in terms of like trying to have what's normal, it just costs more of your paycheck. So that's a huge, huge reality for people. The second thing that's really different is the technology that we're living with all the time. I think have two really um, challenging consequences. One is it's it used to be that if you wanted to like see what other people were doing, you literally had to like see them. Like, I tell the story in the book about my next door neighbor got an electric lawnmower, and there I was with the push one, right? Just thinking all this, like, what's wrong with us? How come we don't have a fancy lawnmower? Because my parents were very frugal, didn't have a color TV, right? I mean, this is not a poor me story, but like they were very frugal. Um, on some things, there was money for other stuff, but they were very careful about what they spent their money on. Now, right, everything's in your phone. You know what everybody's doing. And not only that, but it used to be that you'd have to like look in People magazine to see what the fancy people were doing. And now that's just everywhere. So I think consumption creep, right? How we define normal has just gotten fancier, right? So you start comparing yourself, excuse me, to so many more expensive things, and that whole FOMO, like, why can't I do this? My friends are on vacation. I should go on vacation, right? Is a real thing.
So I'm going to piggyback on that because that's huge. The idea of this consumption creep or just everything getting fancier, the fear of missing out. I mean, I know with social media, people are being kind of hit in the face with what people are thinking it should look like. And then I chuckled when you said, how fast things are moving. Was thinking of my first car that I had to open the trunk with a screwdriver, paid $800 off of a used car lot for it. Different day and age now, I think for sure. Let's pivot and talk about, because one of the things that's important, it doesn't matter what generation it is saving. And you talk about in the book about saving early. Can you explain the concept of compound returns and the significance for young savers of saving early?
So I talk in the book about the magic of compound returns, and it is magic because when you leave your money to grow, not only does the initial amount of money that you save grow, but every year what you get grows too. So, there's that fable about somebody asking for something from, I forget the whole story, but basically they ask for 1 grain of rice on a checkerboard square and they want it to double. And the king says, oh, that's ridiculous. You should ask for more. And he's like, oh, let me tell you how much I'm going to have at the end, right? And it wouldn't fit in the palace, right? So just on a checkerboard, right, that exponential growth is very powerful. So it's not quite that powerful if you're investing, but if you are just earning 7% a year, which I think is maybe a little high, but not unreasonable to expect from if you're in your 20s and 30s and investing in a fairly sort of aggressive, which is I think very appropriate portfolio for that age, your money will double every 10 years. So whatever you save in your 20s is going to be worth twice as much in your 30s, and it'll be worth 4 times in your 40s and 8 times in your 50s and 16 times in your, so just think about that. Oh, I can only save $100 a month, right? Well, that's, $1,200 a year. That's going to be doubling every decade. Just imagine if you can also, as you get raises, put a little more away, in no time, you will be on your way to saving, multiple millions of dollars by the time you're in your 60s, and it won't feel super hard because there are 2 tricks. One is letting that money just grow and double. The second one is every time you get a raise, save some of it. So instead of having consumption creep, eat up your entire raise, right? Let it eat up half of it. And that other half you put into savings, and you don't even almost notice that you're doing it, right? It's very, very powerful. And if you get into that habit in your 20s and 30s, you don't feel like you have any money. And, I certainly didn't. Many people don't have a lot of spare change. But if you don't let your lifestyle suck up every dime that you earn, when you hit your 30s and 40s, if you buy a house, if you have a family, right, yes, your income keeps going up, but so do the expenses. And so that muscle that you're building about not always spending it all, but just spending some of it, right? A, you get a nicer lifestyle, which is good. That's why we work. But B, you also set yourself on a path that for the long term is really going to be amazing.
This is powerful. I love what you're saying here, and you're sharing with us some tricks here. You told the listeners that there's two tricks. There's one, let it just grow, but two, every time you get a raise, save some of it, put it aside, and that's that magic of compound return that you talked about. We use kind of a 7% as just kind of a guess number. I know when I'm wearing my financial advisor hat, they don't let us go above that, so that's good. So
No, sometimes the market will do a lot better than that, but sometimes it won't, right? And over time,
right.
I think that's a very reasonable number, especially when you think about adding in some inflation. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. You also talk about in the book uh, financial misconceptions. What are some common misconceptions about savings and investing that you've encountered, and how do you address these in the book?
so I think the number one misconception about saving is that it's hard and I can't do it, right? I mean, I just think that it may not be possible today to save money, especially if you're in your early 20s, you're just starting out. Um, but it will be possible tomorrow to save money. And so the promise you need to make yourself is, again, the next time you get some more money, save it, save half of it. And that will transform everything. I think a very common mistake people make, and this is true for both saving and investing, is assuming that whatever is today will be forever. That's a very natural human tendency. And we think like that when the market's going up. Well, of course I'm going to keep getting 15 or 20%. The market was up 20% last year. I'm planning that it'll be up 20% next year. It won't be up 20% next year. Probably will be lower. Maybe it'll be higher. I don't know, but it's not going to be up 20%. I can promise you that. So,
Right.
so that straight lining of my circumstances, right? My straight lining of the purse pinching I feel right now, the straight lining of it's all great and I have plenty of spare cash, right? All of these things that we assume are forever just aren't. And so I think as savers, it lets you either overspend or undersave because you just assume my reality will stay. As investors, I think it's one of the most dangerous things you can do to either think it's all going to be great all the time, or maybe worse, it's all going to be terrible all the time. And you make decisions emotionally that can get you into trouble.
That makes sense to me. I know a lot of people act on emotion first, and sometimes when it comes to finance, it's a good idea to kind of step back and look at
Yeah.
things. You talk about in the book about savings. Again, I'm just going to drill a little bit further down on that. Could you offer some practical tips for listeners who might be struggling to
Yeah.
balance savings for retirement with immediate financial obligations, like maybe student loans or high living costs?
So I think the trick again is to just start, like 50 bucks a month, just start. And it does a couple things. One, you actually have some money in the bank, and I think emergency savings are really important. So that really should be a high priority, if not the highest priority. Second is, especially if you work for a company that offers a 401k or a 403b plan, which is, your employer offers a retirement savings program. And especially if they're matching what you put in, your number one priority there is to get the free money because that doubles your investment. You put in 3%, let's say you're earning $50,000 a year, you put in $1,500 a year, your employer will also put in $1,500 a year. You've doubled your money, no matter what the markets are doing. That's like the most powerful thing ever. Once you get up to the maximum amount that your employer will match, then it's time to turn your attention to what I call high interest rate debt. And that might be private student loans. That is certainly credit cards. It might be a car payment, right? Anything over, I use 8% because the sort of long-term returns maybe that you can get investing your money are 7%. But anything over 8%, you should really be pushing. Once you have your emergency savings, once you're getting that full company match, you really should turn your eyes to that high dollar, high interest rate debt. Because that's just eroding your ability to save more in the future every time you don't get that paid down. So that's the number one thing to do after you get the free money.
I love it. I love it. And I hear some prioritization of the debt of the stuff that's north of 8%. So when we start
Yeah.
looking past that high single digit and we're in double digits, and I think consumer credit card debt, really, as interest rates go up, the negative side of that on consumer debt is those interest rates go up. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of that stuff go past the high single digits there. So that's extremely good advice for people who are listening and looking for things that they can take away right away, prioritizing that stuff right up front there. Let's talk about financial planning for major life events. What advice do you have for planning and saving for major life events, such as maybe buying a house or even funding a kid's education?
So again, I would say if you're not already at least getting all the free money, and possibly also, well, I would say different people have different priorities, but getting close to what I would describe as the amount you need to be saving to stay on track to retire at the age you want to retire. I've got a very high level chart in my book on that. I think there are many, many, many great online calculators that I do not yet have links to on my website, but they're great sort of planners that'll let you kind of plug in how much you're saving when you want to retire and let you know how much more you could be or should be saving to get there. I would say until you're well on your way to getting to that percentage of your salary, which for most people is usually between 10 and 15% of their salary, you really should be focusing on paying down debt. But, some people slightly adjust those priorities. I think houses, weddings, children are interesting, right? I think I'm personally a big proponent in making sure that the way you're spending your money is really aligned with your values. So for a wedding, for instance, think carefully about what's the most important thing to you about the wedding. Is it, the number of people you can have? Is it the kind of party you can have? Is it the location of your wedding? Is it, and really make sure that you're lining up your budget with where you care, because if you don't actually care very much, you really don't need to do whatever the wedding planner suggests or the venue suggests or what everybody else does. Like, you just don't have to do it. And, if you think about those values, it's easier to make decisions. The trick I'll tell you that helps me the most when I'm thinking about saving for short-term goals is to think about what that costs in a small chunk. So let's say you're going to have my son's just gotten engaged, so these are real conversations we're having. And let's say the
I
caterer says
love
it's
it.
going to be $85 a plate, right? Okay, so every guest I have is $85. So if I'm thinking about buying a new pair of shoes for, $300, whoop, that's three people. How do I feel about that? Let me think about that. Do I really need those new shoes, or do I really want to have three more people at my wedding, right? So that's a really great way in the moment when you're trying to make decisions. Do I want to save for this goal? A house down payment is maybe a bit bigger, but even so, you can try to chunk it up into units so that you can think, whoa, that's a year off. That means I'll have my down payment a year faster if I don't buy that, right? If I can, so it helps to translate that back to a value that you have, right? Something you're trying to do. And I think in the moment, it can make making decisions a lot easier.
I love it. I love it. Now, you said a lot right there. Just the fact that you don't have to do it. That's liberating to hear that.
You don't.
On some of these goals, that, you gave the example of the wedding, and just not having to do certain things if they don't allow or align with the value, like with what's important, right? So I think that's super important. We are 3 minutes away to the
Oh
end of the show.
boy.
This is moving so quick, right? We could sit here and talk all day on this, but we don't have the time to do that. So I
Right.
definitely want to get this one in though. The impact of technology on personal finance. How has the rise of financial technology like budgeting apps and online investment platforms affected the way individuals manage their finances?
So I was saying earlier that, technology has created these FOMO moments, right? Where you can see what your college roommate just did and you're like, how come I can't afford that vacation or whatever, tempting you into spending. I think the technology for finances is got so many powerful positive things. So again, if you like technology and use it, you can harness it to make stuff easier, like more automated payments for saving or investing, right? That's technology. Um, I think there's a little bit of a danger though, and I saw an academic study on this 4 or 5 years ago that people who had access to online banking tools actually spent more money because gamifying stuff makes you go in it more. And when you go in it more, you do more. So it's great to be able to trade your portfolio online, but you probably shouldn't be in there more than once or twice a year to rebalance. Like if you're doing more than that, you're messing around and you're probably costing yourself money. So I think technology is really powerful. And if it's used well, and that's a little squishy, right? What is well? But done well, it can be enormously powerful, but it also can kind of derail you in subtle ways. And I just say really quickly, an obvious technology thing that's sort of great is subscriptions, right? Hey, I can just sign up and subscribe. Well, there you go. You stop ever thinking about that purchase again.
I
And
love it. I
so
love
I
it.
think there's a double-edged sword here. So just be mindful of that double-edged sword.
I would call subscriptions death by a thousand paper cuts.
It
It's so
is.
easy because they're usually inexpensive. So I'll subscribe to that. And we are right here at the end of the show. The book, The Best Financial Life, Ann's new book. Ann, what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to leave the listeners with today?
Just remember that you can totally do it. Like you got this. You totally have it. So just remember that it's a little bit of work. It's going to feel painful. Sometimes it's not fun, but the payoff is enormous. You will sleep better. You will have a better life. You will find so many more choices available to you if you can start chipping away at some of the fear that you have around money.
I love it. And earlier, before we started recording, you shared with me that for listeners who want to find more information out, they can go directly to your website, which is www.annlester.com. Is that correct?
That is absolutely right. It's Anne with an E. So that would be fabulous.
Perfect.
Lots more to learn there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for dropping by. Have a good rest of the day there.
Thank you so much.